Big news on the injury front.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms, here to bring you Oklahoma Sooners coverage for you every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers tuning in, subscribing to the show wherever you get your podcasts. On today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Go download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply over at Game Time. He's Jay Smith. I'm John Williams. We're going to discuss the wide receiver position for the Oklahoma Sooners in 2024. What are we going to get out of the Tulane Green Wave with no Willie, Fritz, no Michael Pratt? But first, George Stoia of Sooner Scoop and On3 reporting late Tuesday evening that Jayden Gibson suffered an injury and is set for an MRI to determine the severity of the injury to his knee. This is potentially a huge blow to the Oklahoma Sooners. And I mean, I read this and I was immediately pissed off at the football universe for making this happen to Jayden Gibson, because there's been nobody that resembles a quote unquote Brent Venables guy quite like Jayden Gibson, a guy that's shown up as a 4-star wide receiver after the transition from Dan Mullen to Billy Napier at Florida, decommitted, flipped to Oklahoma in that 2022 class, and has been about the work. He has been about the work. He's put his head down. He's grinded away. He's worked his tail off to get himself into a position to have the quasi breakout that he had last year, and then looking like he was going to be a big-time contributor to this team moving forward in 2024. And, man, I really hope that it turns out to be a big old nothing burger. But, dude, I feel for the kid right now. I know, like, as he's going to sleep, we're recording on Tuesday night, as he's going to sleep, he's probably worried about his collegiate football future. So if you throw up some prayers, throw them up for Jayden Gibson tonight. Just, man, I just feel for the kid.
Yeah, it hurt my heart when I saw the tweet come across, right? Because, you know, as you mentioned, he was a part of all that mix-up stuff going on at Florida when they made a coaching change. He comes here, then a coaching change happens again. But he set his roots down and said, no, this is where I want to be, even though he was one of the many players that Caleb Williams helped to recruit to Oklahoma. He decided to stay, and last season, you start to see the glimpses, right? His freshman campaign wasn't that great. He had a couple drops in some key situations that, you know, gave everybody questions. Then he came in last year and was running people over, right? The Iowa State game, he catches the ball, trucks a couple of guys, gets to the end zone. Then you see the TCU game where he catches it deep and he just TCU, and he just kind of just carries the guy to the end zone. You saw the potential there and you knew it was coming, and all we've been hearing earlier was that he was starting to show out in practice. Like, okay, hands are surefire. He's gotten to get confidence back. Emmett Jones has really helped to build him up as far as his confidence, and we were hoping for a massive season. And unfortunately, as you mentioned, there's a chance that we could lose him for the year. So we're just going to hope that it's not something too serious. Hopefully it's something that's tweaked and he's out with a strain for a couple of weeks or so. But, you know, it just, this time of the year when it's fall ball, this is not whenever you hear about an injury that it's usually in our favor.
Yeah, it just really, really, really sucks. I mean, that's the best way I can describe it, because he was a guy you were going to rely upon. I mean, we've talked about, hey, Jaleel Farouk's going to be back. Angelo Anthony looks like he's ready to go for, going to be ready to go for week one. This was a team that has great wide receiver depth, but Jayden Gibson was a significant part of that depth. Whether he was going to be a starter week one or at least your fourth wide receiver, either way, you were going to need him this year. You were going to need his athleticism. You were going to need his ability to win down the field. If we forget, he averaged over 23 yards per reception last year. The dude was dynamic down the field, not just going up and getting the ball, in those 50-50 situations, but he was blowing by guys on the outside. So, I mean, it's a bummer, and it's definitely a significant, potentially a significant loss for the Sooners, because you were going to need him. And now it creates a situation where you're going to need other guys to step in and fill his void. But I just want to highlight the man. I mean, because you look at what Oklahoma has in their wide receiver room. I think any other program in the country, maybe with any other wide receiver coach, a guy like Jayden Gibson might say, hey, you know what? I could go start for about 90 programs in the FBS and not have to sit here and wait my turn. I could go to 90 programs and be a day one starter and get 70, 80 targets this year. But he's been about the work and he's trusted the program. He's been a program guy. We've talked about the program guys, right? Bob Stoops, Javante Barnes showing to be that kind of a guy. Another one that probably could have transferred and been a frontline runner for somebody. And then here we have Jayden Gibson again, just showing like, hey, he's trusting the process. He's trusting Emmett Jones' plan for him. He's trusting Brent Venables, trusting the soul mission, everything that goes on in Oklahoma's football program. And you just hate to see a setback for a kid like that, a man like that. I shouldn't say kid. He's a man. He's putting in the work. And man, I was really, really rooting for him to have a big year this year and let that be the springboard into potentially a 2025 season where he's your number one wide receiver.
Yeah, that's what kind of looks like now at this point, depending on what the timetable is that we receive probably in the next couple of days of what, I mean, Venables is going to, speak to the media sometime this week to kind of really break down what's going on. He always gives a good injury update, which we always appreciate. And, the way, depending on that timeline, it does appear 25 is going to be the year for Jayden Gibson. He'd probably be the more experienced wide receiver out there outside of, like the Brennan Thompson as well as Jaquez Petaway and some of the other young guys that are now in. But he'll be the most seasoned dude as far as being in the program, as far as program guys. So if the timetable isn't favorable, then the focus should definitely be on him building himself up, getting stronger in preparation for a 25 campaign. That could lead to a big breakout, right? We talk about how in the recruiting class, we got 5 dudes right now that can play wide receiver. And I think that's more so because the expectation is that everybody ain't going to be back next year, right? You got enough dudes that if they show out enough, they're going to be drafted within, the first 5 rounds. And so if that's the case, you got to start preparing for replacements. With Gibson, I was hoping he'd been one of them. Now it appears that next year is going to be his chance to really be the leader of that room.
You just hate to see a guy that was on a really, really solid upward trajectory, again, because of the work that he's put in, now have this kind of a setback and then have to start over from scratch. Depending on the timeline, there are no legit details just yet as to the severity of his injury. But anytime you see knee and you see MRI, it's generally not a great sign for what the potential future looks like, at least in the short term. It's probably at the very minimum going to be something that keeps him out the rest of the fall camp, which is definitely going to create a setback to where he lands when the season starts. How is it going to impact the rest of the wide receiver room? What are we going to get out of Oklahoma's wide receivers going into 2024? We're going to discuss that coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. If you're looking for last-minute tickets, you're looking for the best prices, you got to go check out Game Time. Game Time is an official marketplace dealer of Major League Baseball. As you get closer to first pitch, the tickets go down over at the Game Time app with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. I'm looking over at the Game Time app right now, and there are some fantastic events that are going to be coming to the Oklahoma area. Hey, Roman Reigns returned at SummerSlam, and now you get some great opportunity to see the Tribal Chief at the BOK Center this Friday night for $31 over in the Game Time app. Hey, you're not ready to go to see SmackDown this Friday, but September 27th, SmackDown will be at the Paycom Center for $46. Ice Cube is coming to the Choctaw Grand Theater, and you can get also every Oklahoma game is going to be listed over there. Seeing some great prices for South Carolina tickets right now over at Game Time. So go download the Game Time app in the Google Play or the App Store. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On College Football Podcast. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion on the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new college football expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we talked about Jayden Gibson's injury. We talked about what it potentially could mean for him. What does it mean for the Oklahoma Sooners wide receiver room? It's a stacked and talented group from top to bottom. You want Jayden Gibson to be a part of that because it just makes you more dynamic. But let's start here. Deion Burks is a difference maker. No matter where you get him the ball on the field, he's going to be a difference maker for you in the passing game.
Yeah, and it's funny because Bruce Feldman drops his list every year, the Freaks list, which is one of my favorite lists to go through because then it gives you an idea of guys to really keep your eyes on, around the nation. I remember last year was the Michigan defensive lineman. His dad played in the NFL. Always, it slips my mind at this point because now he's gone from college. But he would do like the lift where he would stand up with the weight over his hand. He had like 100-pound weight, and he would just lay from the ground and stand all the way up. It's just ridiculous freaks out there. Deion Burks is landed on this list, and so he's someone that now everybody's going to be paying attention to, right? Like, granted, we knew that he was going to be one of those players that everybody's going to have to watch because he's not only very, very dynamic, very shifty in his route running and very good at route running, but he always finds a way of getting open. And now adding him to this Freaks list, getting a little check mark to his name on something else accolades to keep track of. There's a good chance, man, that him and the Jackson Arnold connection is going to be absurd. Now, we're seeing it now in practice, right? We know what's, for the most part, the defense knows what's going to come down the line. But at the same time, if a dude's just that good, how do you stop him, right? So I think he's going to be probably the number one dude to lean on. And then from there, you've got a plethora of additional players to look at with the unfortunate piece with Jayden Gibson gone.
Yeah, here's what Bruce Feldman of The Athletic had to say in his article about the freaks of college football. He said, Burks proved to be their strongest wideout in the squat at 540 pounds, the bench press at 400 pounds, and the power clean at 340 pounds. He also topped all receivers in jump height, measured in force plates based off his velocity at takeoff. Burks' propulsive force was remarkable in terms of his ability to generate forces of nearly 4 times his body weight in a vertical jump. Okay, there's so much to unpack there, but 400 pounds in the bench from a wide receiver who's 5'11", 5'10" ish. We're being generous with the ish. That's incredible. Like, that is incredible power, strength, explosiveness. I mean, maybe the most explosive receiver we've had since Marquise Hollywood Brown.
That's what it feels like, right? He stands out, right? There was a video that showed him coming back to campus, right when they were getting ready for fall camp. He's already in the weight room hitting them weights. Like, he wasn't wasting his time at all. And hearing that he's pressing over 400 pounds at his frame tells you that his goal is to be as healthy as possible, right? He's taking care of his body and building up enough muscle to make sure that when he's taking those hits, potentially over the middle or even deep when they're trying to contest him, he's making sure that his body's going to be durable enough to be able to handle it. And so I guess from there, the next question is who's the wide receivers to step up? We're still waiting on Andrell Anthony as well as Jalil Farouk to be at least 90%, right? Venables mentioned he anticipates that to be there for the first game of the season around that area. So they may play, they may not. But with Nick and Burks, who's now going to be that number 3 receiver that we need to keep our eye out for?
I mean, my guess right now is going to be Jalil Farouk is going to be the guy that starts for Oklahoma that week 1 game against Temple. But I think with him and Andrew Anthony, you're going to see kind of a short leash in non-conference. Just let them get out there, get their feet wet, get 10, 15 snaps. At what point we see Andrew Anthony, I'm not exactly sure, but I do believe we see Jalil Farouk in week 1. But beyond him, okay, you're looking at a Jaquays Petaway. Is this Brennan Thompson's opportunity to take a step. We've been hearing, some really good things from a number of wide receivers on the depth chart. A guy like, a JJ Hester, who transferred in a couple off seasons ago. Maybe now everything's going to come together for him and he's going to have a breakout campaign. So it's a really, really intriguing group to watch because you've got your number 1 and number 2 in Burks and Nick Anderson. And then that number 3 spot right now is going to be a little bit up for grabs over the next few weeks of fall camp because Jayden Gibson was pretty much slotted into that spot as Farouk and Angelo Anthony recover from injury. Now the door is kind of open for a guy like JJ Hester or a Brennan Thompson to put together a fall camp that earns them some significant playing time.
Yeah. JJ Hester has been a name that's been coming up a little bit as of late because of just how good of a camp he's having. And one thing with him, right, he transferred in from Missouri. He's a Tulsa boy. And health-wise, he just hadn't been as healthy to be able to play. And at his size, he's 6'4", and, at his peak, when healthy, he runs a 4.4 40. So that gets you another guy that you get him up the sidelines, he's gone, right? And he's a big frame dude. So like I said, at 6'4", that's something that you want, right? And he's over 200 pounds. So nice big receiver that runs a 4.4. Sign me up. I'd love to see him. Brennan Thompson is looking to be healthy this year as well. You get him out there on the outside, he's going to burn some folks on that post route. So you can add him. And as you mentioned, Jaquez Petaway, but now you can kind of, pivot over to some of the young players, right? The Zion Kearneys of the world, the Ivan Carry-Ons, right? And honestly, I think the one out of the freshman group that may make that type of a jump probably is going to be Carry-On, right? It feels like the way that we've been recruiting size like crazy. We're going for dudes over 6'1" on a regular basis, but especially for the outsides. And then for that slot, we're looking at dudes in the 5'9", 5'8", 5'10" range because we want those super fast, shifty guys that's hard to catch. I can see Carry-On getting some extra snaps because we knew that he was physically imposing and he stood out a little bit at the spring game in spring practice. This may be an opportunity for him to go do some stuff too.
Yeah, there are a number of guys that Emmett Jones has to work with. And that's a little bit of the beauty of the depth that he's created. Often you look at what he's done since he's arrived in January of 2023, and you think, man, how can they hold on to all these guys? Well, he's got them believing in the process and trusting the developmental plan for each of them. And so you make a great point about a guy like JJ Hester who just hasn't been healthy. You can't develop if you're not healthy. You can't get on the practice field. You can't work in team drills if you're not healthy. And so the fact that he's starting to shine a little bit just goes to show, don't always give up on a dude after one
right.
season. Don't give up on a guy after 2 seasons. Sometimes the developmental plan and process for everybody is just a little bit different. And maybe now is the time for a guy like JJ Hester, who again has all the talent in the world to be a significant impact player. It wouldn't surprise me to see a true freshman factor in, especially in non-conference play, as you're again trying to get guys like Farouk and Angelo Anthony. You're trying to get them some work, but again, not overextending them so that you can have them for non-con. But I think this also, if we're talking long-term for the entire season, this just looks like a Jalil Farouk back at starting wide receiver, one more year. And again, we can go to the fumbles and you can talk about them. They matter. That ball security matters. But let's also talk about a dude who is one of Oklahoma's longest tenured players.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the guys that stuck around after Lincoln Riley left, even though his good buddy Caleb Williams left. Jalil Farouk stayed. Program guy who's now going to get an opportunity to go out on a high note in his senior season.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I don't see Farouk playing in the first game, maybe even 2. It just feels like you want to be cautious with the health of these wide receivers until you get closer to like Tennessee, right? Mm-hmm. But you're still going to need them to play because you got to get them in that game shape. So I'm wondering what our first lineup's going to look like because it's not going to be. I don't think that game 1, 2, and 3 is really going to be a full reflection of what Tennessee's going to see. I think they're going to really mix it up. So, but you make a good point. Jalil Farouk is probably the perfect dude, to start because of him being a veteran presence, Latrell running a similar offense as Levy is going to make it a lot easier to transition for Jackson Arnold. But having a guy like Farouk, who is a possession guy, but at the same time can run up the sidelines if needed, may take some weight off his shoulders. So I'm gonna keep an eye open on that one. I don't know about Temple. I do see Houston in front of him or whatnot, but Temple feels like just a little too fast. But we'll see.
Well, yeah, it's all that matters is making sure him or Angelo Anthony don't suffer any setbacks. And again, hoping for the best on whatever comes from the MRI that Jayden Gibson will probably undergo on Thursday to reveal whatever went down and whatever happened. But wide receiver is going to be a position to watch all season long. We'll have you covered here on Locked On Sooners. Coming up, who are the Tulane Green Wave now? No Willie Fritz, no Michael Pratt. Big time turnover down there in Nollins. Let's discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. So we're continuing our look at Oklahoma's opponents in the 2024 season, and the Tulane Green Wave come up next. And again, it's an interesting team because no Michael Pratt, a guy that helped really carry the load for that program over the last 5 years or so. No Willie Fritz, a head coach who helped develop that program into arguably the best group of 5 program over the last few years, the most consistent. Again, they had big wins over USC. They had a close call, if you're an Oklahoma fan, against Oklahoma at the beginning of the 2021 season. So there's a lot to unpack when we look at Tulane. Where are you kind of focusing your attention? Because again, it's going to be a totally different program than what we've seen.
Yeah, John's coming in as the new head coach there, replacing, like I said, Willie. And I guess the thing for me is what kind of cohesion will they have by the third game of the season, right? Only 10 starters are coming back. If you add the transfers they're bringing in, it started before, that's 15. And the quarterback, Ty Thompson, transferred in from Oregon. Not sure what he really is, right? Because you didn't see much of him at Oregon. I mean, Bo Nix basically ran things there. And for the last couple of years, so, Ty's now trying to come in on his own and make something happen. So the quarterback position's going to be of a lot of intrigue, right? And then, of course, that defense. Tulane's been trying to come in with a lot of defensive players, and I know that in conference, they've got a lot of dudes that are making the conference team. So I'm curious to see exactly what they look like playing this season on the defensive side of the ball. I think that's going to be the thing that makes or breaks them going into the AAC and honestly in the game against us.
So, Jon Sumrall hasn't been a head coach much, but he's 23-4 overall as a head coach, spent time at a lot of different places. Tulane before, he's been at San Diego, he's been at Kentucky, Ole Miss. So it's an intriguing dude, but again, not the same guy that you have with Willie Fritz. He was at Troy and had some success with the Trojans there, but now hoping to take that and turn it into success with Tulane. I think what helps him is that he's recruiting a similar area, with Troy down there and kind of that SEC footprint, trying to make significant impacts and find those hidden gems. Well, he was successful at Troy. Now he's hoping to take that to another level with the backing and the support that he has at Tulane. That's going to be to another level. We've seen, guys that were at the lower kind of group of 5 level programs be able to make a jump and make significant splashes as they kind of climb. Kalen DeBoer is one of those dudes, was coaching in the FCS or the NAIA at one point, and then went to Fresno State, had a ton of success, went to Washington, now at Alabama, just had a lot of success different places. So if he can continue that, that'll be intriguing. But to me, as I look at this game and I start to scout the opponent, it looks just like that final tune-up game for the Oklahoma Sooners. If there were a preseason in college football, the Oklahoma Sooners have it in their non-conference schedule, and Tulane gives them an opportunity to work out all the final kinks as they get ready for Tennessee.
Yeah, the good thing is these tune-ups aren't going to be borderline cakewalks. Now, I mean, we talked about Temple, and unfortunately, my appreciation for them playing against us. And when we scheduled this game was back when Matt Rule was actually still running things. So they were actually they were up and coming at the time. And unfortunately, things have not gone the direction to keep it that way. But that one's kind of your tune-up. And like I said, the others are really good tune-ups in preparation for the SEC, because Houston bringing in the players they're bringing in, Tulane having that Louisiana footprint and getting players that usually they don't end up at LSU but want to go to LSU. So they've got some big players, right? They've got some size on them. And so in the last, a couple times we played them, they were competitive with Willie. And so I think John's going to be able to do the same thing. Coach Sumrall is going to be able to keep them competitive, especially, like you said, the success he had at Troy and recruiting in the same area. I guess the big question is going to be, what does Ty Thompson bring to the table? That, to me, I think he's going to change it, because we knew Michael Pratt was everything for them, right? If they had Pratt in that Ole Miss game, they win that game. Right. Mm-hmm. And they did everything possible to almost win it without him. So, right. So when they get that close, it makes you a little nervous. I'm ready to see what they look like at that point. So we'll see what they like when they come in and play.
Ty Thompson. You look at a guy like Ty Thompson. He's a former 4-star quarterback. I mean, he's a talented kid that had a lot of teams chasing him. I mean, everybody out on the West Coast. I mean, he committed to Oregon. He was the number 7 quarterback in the 2021 recruiting cycle, that same class that featured Caleb Williams. This is a guy that had LSU to him. So you're looking at a quarterback that was highly thought of in that recruiting cycle. And, Oregon decided to go the transfer quarterback route and go with Bo Nix, and then go with Dylan Gabriel, and then also, added another, big time quarterback prospect in Dante Moore, getting the transfer from UCLA. So let's not sleep on Ty Thompson. We're not going to do that. Again, it's going to be an athletic dude that's going to create some headaches for Oklahoma in the read option game, in the run game, in the RPO game. But this is going to be a big jump for him in competition. Tulane, this is not going to be an easy road trip for them, even though Tulane typically is going to have some difficult games. The week before they play Oklahoma, they host Kansas State. So they will be game ready for Oklahoma after they play Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards and a Chris Kleiman team that will be very well coached. So Oklahoma can't really sleep on this Tulane team. It's not your same team, but it's going to be a good team. Whether it's a really, really good team in year 1 under Jon Sumrall, that remains to be seen. But I think it's going to be a good team.
Yeah, no, I don't think that they're going to be a slouch, right? I mean, last season they did go 11-3, and again, they did lose a lot of players, bringing back only 10 returning starters. But I mean, they did some work in the portal overall. It's going to hinge on the quarterback, of course, and they still got Kai Horton too. Right? I don't want to sleep on him. He's a returning quarterback who played in that Ole Miss game whenever they lost Michael Pratt. So we'll see how things turn out there. Defensively, though, as long as Tulane keeps majority of that defense intact, or even scheme or something of that nature, keep and stay aggressive, I think that they're going to be a challenger. Right now, Phil still has them rated as the second best team in the AAC and right behind UTSA. That's going to be a big one, man. If they're going to be that competitive and have this many players on the first and second team, I mean, one big one, you get to see the return of our boy Mario Williams. He makes his return to Norman from, after leaving Norman for USC and then ended up at Tulane. They did a good job of bringing in some really good players, and he's actually considered a preseason pick for the first team for the AAC. So, I mean, talented kid. I just hope we this will be the second game in a row we get to run into a former Sooner from the last regime, which is kind of intriguing.
Yeah, so they'll play Houston and face Latrell McCutcheon. That'll be the offense's opportunity to, say a little something. And then the next week they'll play Mario Williams. And, Gentry Williams and Woody Washington are going to want to have something to say about what Mario Williams does that day. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in to the show and being a part of the show. Subscribe to the program wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all platforms and over on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. Also go check out the Locked On College Football podcast for your second listen. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Again, thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Also go check out the Locked On College Sports 24/7 streaming channel over on YouTube as well, getting you ready for the college football season with great shows from across the Locked On Podcast Network. Follow Jay on Twitter at Unfair Sports, myself at John9Williams. The show is at Locked On Sooners on all the social media platforms, and we'll be back to break down tight end. Is it Bauer Sharp? Is it Jake Roberts? Will we get a young gun stepping up and making plays in 2024? Coming up on our next episode of Locked On Sooners. But until then, he's Jay Smith. I'm John Williams. Boomer
Sooner.